Okay, so I think we'll get started. We are live on Zoom today, and we just want to say good afternoon and welcome to today's panel discussion on COVID-19 and how it's impacted the investment management industry. My name is Anne Marie Fleurbaijj, and I'll be moderating today's panel. We typically give these talks in person at schools and universities, and so we're thrilled to be able to continue our program online via Zoom. And we thank you all very much for joining us today. So over the next hour, we're going to do some quick introductions of the panel, and then I want to explore three areas with our panelists. First, how the crisis has impacted the day-to-day workings of their firms. Second, what the impact has been on their clients' investment strategies. And then finally, I'm going to ask our panelists for some advice for students looking for careers in investment management. But first, some introductions. So as I mentioned, my name is Anne Marie, and I'm a managing director at the Cambridge University Endowment Fund. And I'm also one of the co-founders of GAIN, Girls Are Investors. Some of you may already be familiar with GAIN as an organization, but for those of you still learning about us, our aim is to inform and inspire young women about the many highlights of investing as a career. And I personally think it's one of the most interesting and challenging and intellectually rewarding careers out there, particularly in times like this, when a health crisis has caused such great disruption to the economy and to financial markets. So with that in mind, I'm really excited for today's discussion because we have three really talented and interesting women on the line, and they're going to share their thoughts on how COVID-19 has impacted the investment management industry. So let me quickly introduce them here. And I'm going to start with Annabel Watson. Annabel, you're a relationship manager focused on wealth management at Deutsche Bank. So if you wouldn't mind, if maybe you could just give some background on yourself and what it means to be a relationship manager and how you came to be one.
Sure, thanks Anne-Marie, and hi everyone. Good afternoon. It's really nice to be able to reach some of you through all of this. So as Anne-Marie said, I work as what's called a relationship manager, and I think it's probably worth pointing out that the sort of terms vary between different companies, but what my role is in general is being the point of contact for the client across our wealth management platform offering. So we offer both investing services, but also lending, financial planning, which includes things like pensions, intergenerational planning, and those types of topics. So my job is really to help the clients and work out for them how we can best help them with their aims and objectives using what we have at the firm. And I personally really enjoy that. I think it's a great job in terms of if you like having the contact with people as well as if you're interested in economics and markets. So I came to that. I did a MSc at Oxford in economics, so I might have been in a similar place to many of you. And I started life as an analyst on the institutional side of investing, so working more on a fund that had pension funds and county councils as clients. And that's how I kind of learned, how to value companies and that type of role. And through that, I moved into actually the more private client side, because for me personally, I really liked having the connection with the individuals and being able to talk to the sort of end person. So I enjoyed that bit. And from there, I moved from that company and have moved a couple of times now, and I'm now at Deutsche Bank, which I really enjoy.
Great. Thanks so much. So next up, Mona. We have Mona Shah, who's a multi-asset investor at Stonehage Fleming. And you recently launched your firm's sustainable investment portfolios. So I wanted to ask you, Mona, if you wouldn't mind giving a bit of flavor of what you do and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. Hi like it's very exciting to be able to talk to you today, and we're looking forward to answering all of your questions. Like many of the people on this panel, I did economics and politics at university. I went to Bristol. I did those subjects because I was interested in the world around me and I enjoyed them. But I have to say I sadly used very little of what I learned. And I would also say that the best analyst I've ever hired did a history of art degree, and I really think it's about the skills you learn at university rather than the knowledge. And I also think that the investment industry is really great because it rewards people who have more rounded skill sets. I think some industries really favour numbers people, and other industries can really favour people with great communication skills. But actually within the investment industry, there's so much diversity in terms of the roles that are available. And I think lots of different kinds of people with different kinds of skills can find niches. And sorry, I've gone on a tangent. But I joined a wealth manager called Rathbones as a very lowly graduate in 2006. And then I worked my way up to lead the collectives research team. So that means the team that invests in funds, funds being sort of pooled vehicles that allow investors to access a whole portfolio of securities of investments if maybe they don't want to pick individual ones, or perhaps don't quite have the wealth to pick them on their own. And I worked my way up to lead that team. And then in September 2018, I joined Stonehage Fleming, which is also part of that wealth management spectrum, but it's a family office. So it looks after wealthy families where maybe the responsibilities that they have in looking after their wealth are so complex and so difficult that it makes sense for them to have their own office in order to do that. So I joined there in September 2018, and I'm really delighted to be working in the sustainable investment sphere because I'm quite driven by learning. I'm a really curious person, and after working in investments for 12 years, it's really great to move on to somewhere new. I'm the sort of classic electric car driving hippie vegan, so sustainable investment does suit me. Yeah, it's a really interesting space to be, where, by the way, in the last year or two, returns have actually been better than in the mainstream investment sphere, but we can talk about that later. Thank you.
Great. We will definitely touch on that. So thanks so much. That's a great answer, and actually leads me really well into our next panelist, which is Anna Gallagher, who works on the Asia Emerging Opportunities Fund at Prusik Investment Management. And it's particularly relevant, Mona, what you brought up, because Anna studied literature at Oxford. And so, Anna, I wonder if you could give a little bit of background of how you went from reading literature at Oxford to managing an Asian-focused investment portfolio.
Yeah, sure. So, of course, not a natural starting point for going into investment. I think there were a few things that really kind of encouraged me to go into the industry. I did actually do economics at A-level. And then I also was very interested in China. And in between school and university, I spent 1 year living in China and was really keen to do a job which would actually mean I could read and study about what was happening in China every single day. And I found that the best way to do that actually was through investment. And when I was at university, I did an internship. I spent 8 weeks living in Edinburgh, where I did an internship at a company called Baillie Gifford. And at the end of the 8 weeks, I was very happy to be offered a job with Baillie Gifford. And at that point I said, okay, that would be fantastic, but actually I'd like to go back to China for another year. So I went back to China for 1 more year. And again, sort of, I would say those 2 years have been a really valuable experience to me working in investment. But I think for me, really doing that internship was very important. It really gave me a chance to show my colleagues what I could actually do once I was kind of on the job, rather than just kind of saying I have this qualification or that qualification. So yeah, that was a fantastic experience. I spent 4 years working at Baillie Gifford. I learned a huge amount there. I mean, I would say that they actually emphasize hiring graduates from different backgrounds. So the CIO at the time had done history at Oxford. So there wasn't this kind of, you have to have done maths or economics or science. And then because of that, it was a very patient environment. You could really learn sort of the accounting that you needed to do, and the finance sort of aspects that you really needed. And yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the job is also around kind of how much you can read, and the fact that I love to read widely, and for what it's worth, I feel like I can read very quickly. I can get through huge amounts of material in a short period of time, and that has really stood me in good stead. So yeah, I would definitely encourage anyone who has an arts background to think about investment as a career opportunity.
Great, that's fantastic. Thanks for all of your introductions, and really welcome to all of you, and thanks for participating. So I'm going to start now. So we'll start with our topic of the day, which is the impact of the crisis on how we all work in investment management. And I wanted to start with how it's impacting the actual workings of your firms. And Mona, if I can start with you, please. Maybe you could just give a brief overview of what your work life was like pre-COVID-19 and what it looks like now.
Yes, sure. So there were many similarities, but also some quite crucial differences. And the first thing is I still start my day with a couple of solid hours of reading, partially the news that has come through first thing in the morning and overnight, but also I try to stop myself being totally influenced by what we call market noise, which is just the flood of information that comes through every morning. So I try to read more strategically and try to read articles away from the financial press as well, pulling in other sources. So that's the same. I still have probably just as many internal meetings, sadly, as I used to before, but they're all on video now, and that's okay. I would say probably one of the good things is that probably actually it makes the conversation dynamic more balanced, I've observed. So previously I would go into a meeting room sometimes and you would have the same people dominate, and I actually feel that now this video platform has made people more equal, and I think people that are naturally quieter are able to get their voices heard a bit more. That's something I've personally noticed, which I like. Now the area where I'm struggling is in terms of finding new ideas for my portfolios, finding fund managers who I think could be excellent generators of returns going forward. My personal investment process does have behavioural inputs as a key factor, and for that I do feel I need to spend time in a room with someone, understand how they cope under pressure, understand what our communication dynamic is like, because when performance is very good, it's all very easy to pick up the phone and get the answers that I need. But when performance is tricky, I actually need an even better relationship with a fund manager so that we can understand what's going on. Because unfortunately, if they can't articulate to me and I can't articulate to my investors why the investment isn't working, it's hard to resist the temptation to sell. So that's my struggle at the moment. I have got new ideas. There are new managers that I am talking to through video, but I'm really struggling to have the confidence to allocate capital to them.
That's really interesting. And thank you for sharing that. I think that's going to be a real challenge as we try to maintain these personal networks and those personal relationships that at the end of the day are still very crucial to the investment process. I mean, we can look at numbers and try to do analytics 6 ways to Sunday, but maintaining a personal relationship with people and the ability to communicate an idea is so essential to what we do. And Annabel, I wonder if anything that Mona's been talking about resonates with you. If not just with, you know, how COVID-19 has changed the way we work, but maybe you can also touch upon how it's changed how you maintain your network.
Yeah, sure. I think I'd start by saying what I really realize is actually how fortunate we are to be in the line of jobs that we are, because actually we've been able to continue in this crisis. And I think, you know, that is something perhaps that I hadn't realized or hadn't sort of attributed that value in the role that I have prior to this, because the firm that I'm in our department, you know, no one has been furloughed. Everyone is still incredibly busy and able to work remotely. So I think that is one thing you can say for investment across the board. It might not be perfect, but you can actually do your job very well remotely. And that's certainly an appealing factor right now. I think from my point of view, sort of similar to what Mona is saying, the hard bit is actually that real sort of physical meeting with the client. And it's fine if you already have an existing relationship with someone to then sort of transition to video and on the phone. But I think it's harder if for us we're trying to win new business to sort of start a relationship with someone that you've never met before without having an in-person meeting. I think that still, you know, when you talk to personal investors, you know, their wealth is such an important thing to them. You know, you become a really, really very trusted advisor. And for someone to sort of hand over their money to you, you know, and a lot of information about their personal circumstances and finances without having met you is probably, you know, not sort of feels a bit foreign to them. But I think what I have noticed is, as this crisis has unfolded, in the first couple of weeks, we had all of our clients saying, well, we'll just cancel the meetings for the moment and we'll come back to this, you know, when things have improved. And as it's become more apparent that this situation is going to go on for longer, actually people have sort of come back and said, well, actually, maybe you're right, we should just do it by video, or we can just do it over the phone. And I've been actually really impressed by how our business has managed to adapt to that. So just, you know, some small things like, it's hard obviously right now to get wet signatures or to have your signature witnessed. So you just have to change, you know, the way you go about internal processes to be able to accommodate that. And I think, you know, all that investment that you make in further technology stands you in good stead for when we come out of this anyway. And I think in terms of obviously how it's changed for me, I'm now working 100% remotely. All of our business has been, but I think a lot of people will stay doing that going forwards. And then to your other question, Anne Marie, in terms of keeping up contacts, I think you just have to be really proactive about it. But one thing I have noticed is that some people who were before, you know, extremely busy and hard to get hold of, are now at home all day. So, you know, they sometimes do have a bit more time. And actually, you know, when they've had a lot of the sort of normal activities taken out of their lives, they're actually quite grateful to receive phone calls and emails and people getting in touch. So I think there is a real opportunity now for people who can be more proactive and pick up the phone. And, you know, we are looking at different ways of doing things. So for example, with some of the firms that we work with, who we would call intermediaries, so lawyers and accountants, we're looking at doing things like podcasts because we can't host joint physical events with them. So I think you just have to be a bit more creative about what you offer to clients, how you work with other firms in your industry.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. And I think I'd love to come back to this concept and maybe a bit later on when we're talking about careers advice for students. But I'd love to come back to this concept of developing relationships and how we develop brand new relationships, you know, online and virtually. So I'm going to park that for a little bit, and we'll come back and revisit that with the whole panel. But Anna, maybe if I can bring you into the conversation, and again, does all of this resonate with you? And then particularly, does it, you know, how are you finding making decisions in this environment and
Yeah.
you know, as a team, and how, you know, how are you working and how are you actually pulling the trigger? Has that changed dramatically for you?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, obviously what's been going on in the real world has been very upsetting and difficult to see, but from a kind of slightly cold-hearted investment perspective, it's actually been a very exciting period. We've had quite a long period now of sort of lots of companies that we would really like to buy looking very what we would call expensive. So the valuation just really didn't look attractive. And then what happened was that we had this very short, sharp period of really indiscriminate selling. And this is, for me, one of the fascinating things about markets, and why I would kind of say, it's not just all about having that economics degree or that maths degree. It's not just about the numbers. It's also about how people feel. And so, of course, what you had was this period of, you could see it in the markets, there was real panic. And people were just selling anything, regardless of what it was. But actually, as an investor, you kind of have to really have a good balance between your sort of way of thinking rationally and also your feelings. And so if you can step back from that panic, there were some fantastic opportunities. And so to be honest with you, the main difference for how I was working was I was probably working a lot harder. So I mean, I was working sort of probably 15 to 16-hour days, because there were so many opportunities coming up, and we really had quite a narrow time frame to make the most of those opportunities. Yeah, I mean, there were, this may be a little bit too technical, but for example, we were able to buy industry leading businesses that have the potential to grow. For many years, they were trading on something like 35 times beforehand, and they went down to 15 times. And this was just, actually a very exciting opportunity in a way.
No, that's so interesting what you're saying about, and we'll come back to investment opportunities in the next section, because I think that's a really interesting area for us all to draw out and talk about. In terms of the work-life balance, that all of a sudden you were working so much harder. I have to say, personally, I found it, I sit down at my desk at 7:30 in the morning, and all of a sudden it's 7 o'clock at night, and I feel like I've moved from my desk because of the Zoom calls, and there's just so much information and so much going on. It's been, I mean, it's super exciting, but I think I have to put a little reminder in my Apple Watch to get up and stand. So if I can actually, maybe I can talk to you, and maybe I'll go to Mona with this question in terms of, coming back to the relationship development. So much of our work historically, and certainly for me, I probably did 400 to 500 face-to-face meetings every year, and I traveled a ton. I wonder, Mona, if you think that the investment industry will return. Well, first of all, does that mirror what you were doing before, and do you think that the investment industry will go back to how it was, or do you think that this more remote meetings will continue on indefinitely? Sorry, I've caught you on the move. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There was an Amazon delivery driver.
Oh, no.
He kept saying, "Open the door, open the door," and I obviously didn't think I could, but I did actually have my husband prepped to get all of the deliveries, but this chap refused to ring the doorbell.
Oh no. The curse of the Zoom conference call. So excellent.
So here we go. This is a real example of the complexities of working from home. And I have to say, I'm full of admiration for people who are working from home and also juggling childcare. I can't imagine how difficult that must be. But to answer your question, I've been doing this for 12 years, and I've seen in various places where I've been an intern, and also from talking to my friends, that the remnants of FaceTime culture still exist in many workplaces. And by FaceTime culture, I mean, the longer you're in the office, the harder you must be working. And I just don't think that that's true at all. And I think there's more and more awareness now of it's not how hard you work, it's how smart you work. And now all of us here on the panel have been working much longer hours in the last few months, and that happens sometimes. But I'm very grateful of the flexibility that I theoretically now have working from home, and I feel that that's made the playing field more level for many people. And yes, we're all learning how to draw better boundaries between work and non-work while also existing within the same four walls. But I think this will help anyone who not just sort of more classically has a family or is a carer or has other things going on, but also people who aren't as productive between the hours of, say, 8 a.m. and lunchtime. I'm one of those people, and I've forced myself to go to work at these hours where frankly I'm embarrassing to be around, and so I do check in every morning at 8:30 with my team for our morning call, but then like I said, I do read and stuff, but I'm useless really until about 12 o'clock, but that's okay because now I'm working later, but my productivity has gone up, and I think my boss finally sees that now.
So interesting.
Yeah, and then just finally, I would just say, as a sustainable investor, I have been I've been fairly depressed about the number of pointless flights I've seen many employees getting all around the world. And I'm delighted that has been forced to stop, and people have been forced to re-evaluate what the value is of getting on those planes. And so obviously that will decrease going forward.
Yeah, no, and I have to say, there's part of me misses the travel, part of me doesn't miss the travel. And certainly it's so nice to look outside. Well, today it's cloudy, but it's so nice to look outside, and it's not a plane in the sky, and you really do see the impact of the lower pollution. So we'll see how, as things resume, our normality commences, and what that impact has. So that's great. Thank you so much all for those thoughts. And I have to say, I really look forward to the day when we can actually do a face-to-face meeting and have lunch or coffee with someone closer than 6 feet away. But I do think it's still a few months from now. So I want to move on now in terms of and touch upon the area that Anna was reaching into a little bit earlier, and that's how has the current environment impacted your ability, or impacted the investment opportunity available to you, and specifically, what's happened with the volatility, and what you're thinking about going forward in terms of where the opportunities lie. And Annabel, maybe if I can start with you and ask you if you can give a flavor of what your clients are most concerned about right now. What are they talking about, and where are they, what are they seeing that's an issue? What are they concerned about investment wise, and where do they think potential opportunities might lie?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think what's obviously been different about this recession is that it's been very much caused by COVID. So it's very different from, a lot of recessions we've seen before, which have been caused by structural imbalances in the economy. So I think what scares people this time is that they don't feel that they can use prior or previous recessions as a sort of good indicator of what might happen this time. So I think there's a huge amount of uncertainty about how this unfolds and how quickly we rebound. And I think what clients worry about, everyone now just wants to talk about coronavirus. It is really hard to have any investment conversation without talking about that. And obviously none of us are experts or scientists, and actually what we've been doing is getting experts on calls like this for our clients, and they actually really like that. But I think the important thing is clients, they worry for themselves, for their own businesses, because there's so much uncertainty. And then when I think it comes to their investment portfolios, a lot of them are actually worried about the fact that markets haven't fallen more at this point. I'm really interested to hear the other panel's thoughts on that. But I think what they're saying is, for how bad this has been a hit, a sort of unprecedented change to our lives. Markets haven't, they did obviously fall and have come back a bit. And I think they're actually scared about this potential second leg down. And certainly our view is that, the markets aren't discounting a sort of return to the lockdown situation. So it feels like there are still a lot of risks out there for things to get worse before they get better again. And then, I think, sort of like we've said, it's such a sort of personal experience, this lockdown, because if you have been in any kind of food delivery business, or if you're in a tech business, you actually might be doing extremely well now. If you've been someone who's been running a hotel and bar network, you're really struggling and you're wondering whether life's ever going to get back to normal. So I think it's impacting people in such different ways, and it's something that we, it's similar to the sort of working from home thing, in terms of, if you have juggling 3 kids, as we said, and jobs and all the rest of it, it's so much harder. If it's actually, while you've cut out really long commute times, you might be thinking this is really, really great. So I just think that it's so specific to individuals in terms of how they're seeing this crisis unfold for them personally.
No, that's great. And thank you for that. That's interesting what you say in terms of the clients being concerned about the next leg down. And Anna, I wonder if that sounds familiar to you, that again, if that is a familiar type of conversation as what you're having at your work, and maybe you can talk about that, and also what's the impact been on your investment portfolio.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think sort of one of the challenges about working in investment is that we work in markets that move a lot and are by nature very unpredictable. And there is this temptation to kind of say, actually, I think tomorrow markets are going to do this, or next month markets are going to do this, or next year markets are going to do this. But actually, that's not our job. Our job is really not to predict what markets are going to do. Our job is to look at the businesses that we're invested in, see what the kind of the long-term growth opportunity is for those businesses, see what the competitive advantages are for those businesses, see how they are managed. And often, if all those pieces are in place, even if the what we call the macro backdrop is very, very challenging, the strongest companies will survive the hardest times, and they'll do very well in the good times. And so that's something that we've really, really tried to focus on. I mean, at the same time, I would say that this is quite a unique situation, and there are opportunities to look more for businesses that will do well during this period, but also continue to do well after this period. And that can be backed by kind of structural trends which were already in place before the crisis, but which are getting accelerated because of the crisis. So for example, a lot of companies that have digital aspects to their businesses, they may have had, say, a digital target for subscribers for the next 12 months, which they've managed to achieve in 5 weeks, because it's been phenomenal. And so areas such as e-commerce, cloud computing, food delivery, these are companies that we were already invested in, but we have actually been, as a firm, increasing our exposure to these kinds of companies. Again, there's a slight nuance to the second part, which is because we invest in Asia, there are these growth opportunities there which might not exist so well in developed markets. So, for example, and many of you may have gone backpacking to Asia and seen that in the streets there's not lots of big kind of shiny, clean, brand new looking stores. A lot of it's kind of like what we call mom and pop stores. But there is this shift towards what we call organized retail. And again, this is something we have seen accelerate in the crisis. Particularly one market I look at is Vietnam, where wet markets are very popular. But of course, wet markets in China are implicated in potentially the beginning or the spread of this disease. And so you've seen consumers moving from these wet markets to organized stores. And, you know, as I said, this has really been a very interesting and exciting time from an investment perspective. So, yeah, I mean, I would still say that we probably have conversations about where we think markets are going to go. We all fall into that trap sometimes, but it's really important just to try and stay focused on the businesses that you're invested in.
So maintaining a really fundamental view of the company as opposed to trying to predict where the markets are going on a day-to-day basis is how you would be approaching your portfolio.
Yes, I mean, I would also say that, I mean, you know, yes, we have also done expert calls with scientists, but I spent at least 10 days doing nothing but reading about the Spanish flu in 1918 and trying to understand the history of that and kind of how that worked and where the risks were. And you know, people often talk about the second wave and what caused that second wave, you know, and what are those factors that could still be in place today, and is there a real kind of human risk here still that could feed through to markets. And I mean, I don't need to share all my conclusions with you right now, but it's that has also been part of the process. So rather than kind of guessing where markets might go, really trying to dig into the real world problem that we're facing has been part of the process. And that is something which I have always loved about investment. You are literally all day looking at things which are happening in the real world around you, and they're changing. And it is change and this kind of, yeah, uncertainty that's really exciting to try and understand better.
Great. That's super. Thanks for that. And Mona, I want to bring you into this conversation as well, because you just launched this investment, sustainable investment fund. And I wonder if you think that what's going on in the wider markets could accelerate the trend towards sustainable or impact investing, or if it's changed your clients' outlook there, and how maybe it's changed the way you're investing, the way you're allocating assets, I should say.
Yeah, I suppose so. We're in a place now where in February and March, clearly we saw a lot of panic in markets, and that panic seems to have subsided now. Markets have rallied a bit. I don't know what that means though. Of course, we're at risk of another drawdown from here, but I'm in a place now where actually I'm worrying a lot about what this pandemic is going to mean for the environment. So from what I've read, 70% of the sustainability related headlines post-COVID have been related to the social side. So things like treatment of workers, health and safety, social distancing, etc., etc. So, you know, that's great. I think that many companies are going to be judged by their actions during this period, and so it's been a really interesting real world stress test for sustainability strategies like mine. But now going forward, I'm worried about the environment, and I'm worried about it being forgotten. Anna mentioned these wet markets, and the United Nations has said that 75% of infectious diseases come from wildlife. So I personally don't think that this pandemic is just a social problem. I think the environment should be taken equally seriously. And now that this recession looks more and more worrying, I'm worried about governments and company management teams going into a mindset of growth at all costs and the environment being forgotten again. So apart from just, you know, broader concerns that we all have about climate change, etc., etc., in my particular strategy that I run, I'm judged not only on my investment returns, but I'm judged on various impact metrics as well, such as tons of carbon emissions offsets, litres of clean water saved, the percentage of women that are on the boards of the companies that I own. And so those metrics, I would say, some of them are at risk if we just focus on social considerations going forwards. And that's what I'm worried about currently.
Interesting. And do you think, is there anything that you can do as an asset allocator to ensure that your concerns are recognized at the company level?
Just keeping on talking really about the environment, making sure that that is on the agenda for all meetings, rather than the more immediate concerns of when are your factories going to be up and running again, and how much of the portfolio is impacted by social distancing, and really broadening the exposures within the portfolio beyond healthcare and healthcare related plays.
I think that concept of investor engagement is so essential to what we do. And I think it's something that I think if we look backwards into previous history, investment managers may not have taken that engagement responsibility very seriously. And that's one of the most encouraging things that I've seen over the course of the 20 years that I've been in the industry, is that we've gone from an industry where we just either we didn't vote our shares or we voted with the board unquestioningly, to a point where we actually do much deeper engagement with boards of directors, and thinking about the responsibility, our fiduciary responsibility for how we vote the shares of our ultimate asset owners. I think that's been a really interesting and frankly an encouraging change. And I recognize the concern that you're voicing about the environment, but I hope that the discipline we've learned in the last few years of engagement and proactively encouraging the stewardship and responsible investing, that doesn't go out the window. So I hear your concern. I'm hoping that the engagement doesn't go away, though, or it doesn't flip direction. I am conscious of time, and we've got loads of things to get through, and we've got some questions coming through specifically on advice for the students. So if I can start with you, Annabel, and we've got a question of any advice specifically to graduates interested in this in the industry, who are graduating into this environment. Sorry, I'm going to rephrase. Do you have any advice for people who are graduating now who would like to get into the industry in the future? How would you recommend that they market themselves, apply for jobs, and specifically, maybe you can talk about your firm's hiring outlook in light of the current crisis.
So I think the first thing I would say just broadly is that I think investment is a really great role for women. I think we need more women in the industry, and I think all firms are looking for that. So I think, you should be encouraged that you are the people that we're after. And I think it was touched on earlier, but a lot of the jobs play to skills that women tend to be really good at, which are the soft skills, or the mix of the soft skills as well as the sort of academic side. And I would just say, try to, the thing about our industry is that there are actually a huge number of different roles available out there to you, which require different skill sets and will suit different people. So I would just try to think specifically about what it is that you enjoy the most, and where you think your skill set lies. And I sort of, that was the advice that I was given when I was a child by a sort of family friend of ours who was a CEO, who basically said, it really doesn't matter what you do. If you're the best cleaner in London, you'll do really well. And I thought about that, and I thought, that's actually really good advice. So it's try to take yourself down a role which plays into the bits that you think you're sort of better at and then that you enjoy. And I think if you manage to mix those two things, you will end up being really successful. And then I would just say, you know, don't afraid to be afraid to be slightly different or follow your own path. So I think, you know, when we interview people, it's always really interesting if they've kind of done something else outside of their normal sort of curriculum, and if they can explain, you know, and it doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's sports or charity or particular like interest or passion. I think it's just that demonstrating sort of passion and ability to have a broader interest. I think that's really important for investment, because we've sort of touched on the fact that you need to take in a huge amount of information and process, and you need to sort of have a broader view of the world. So I think anything which is like slightly more unusual is always really interesting. And then I would say just, you know, just sort of be proactive and talk to people. And a lot of people in the current situation are obviously using sort of social media and online much more than they were before. So, you know, you can go through your LinkedIn and see if you have connections with people in potential firms who might be interested, and just drop them a line and say, hi, you know, do you have 5 minutes and I can ask you some questions on what it's like to work at Deutsche Bank. And I think, you know, you'll probably be surprised by how many people are happy to help you out with that type of thing.
That proactive reaching out to someone, as you say, on LinkedIn or through personal networks, I think the number one advice I always give people when I'm, especially at the university level or at the graduate level that I meet, is, you know, really nurture your network and don't be afraid to ask for help. I think in my experience, 90% of people are happy to help in some way, as long as it doesn't cost them money or reputation. So if you can reach out to someone and say, like, I'm really interested in what you're doing or finding out more. I think, to your point, Annabelle, the hard part for me, especially, you know, coming out of university, was I knew what some of my strengths were, but I didn't necessarily know where that would fit career-wise. And so maybe building upon your point of really just asking lots of questions. I don't know, Anna, maybe you can jump in here and talk about, especially coming from such a different background and you know, coming from literature, and I know you studied a bit economics as well at A level, but I wonder, how did you decide upon investment management, and what advice would you give to students who are interested in finding out more, who don't know anything about it? What advice would you give them to find out more?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what sort of led me into the industry, I definitely wanted to do something that was very challenging, and I wanted to do something that was research-based. And also, it was kind of a rejection, I think, of sort of potential other opportunities which were available at the time. So I think I did some work experience in advertising, and I just realised on day one, it just wasn't for me. I really did want something kind of quite cerebral, where I could sort of both work independently and as a team. And, you know, I really would stress, I think investment management is a fantastic job for those kinds of skills. And similar to what Annabelle said, which I think is an excellent point about kind of, you know, doing something a bit different. I really don't think when I was hired, it didn't matter that I went to Oxford at all. It didn't matter what my A-levels were. I think really my interest in China was part of what opened the door. And it doesn't have to be, you know, a kind of a point of difference that involves you going halfway across the world. But as Annabelle said, if you can show a kind of interest or show a difference, you know, I think the other thing that's important to remember when in investment is that it's been shown, and I think Gain even has a slide on this when they do their schools presentations, that diversity is very important when you're making investment decisions. And that can be diversity of age and of ethnicity or gender, but also it can be diversity of experience. And so if you have, you know, done different things or tried different services or products, you have no idea what kind of edge that might give you. And I think things are changing so rapidly now that actually even kind of being young can be an advantage. You know, there are sort of new tech applications or services out there that you might know about, that someone 10, 15, 20 years older than you really they don't understand so well. And, you know, so there are things which you might not realize can be an advantage, but can be.
That's great. And you touched upon something really interesting, Anna, which was the research skills. And it draws into one of the questions we've received from the audience about someone with a STEM PhD background wanting to move into the financial industry. And I think there's a big misconception for a lot of people of what investment is. They kind of think you have to be this kind of numbery, bankery kind of person who's always been interested in finance. And I stress that being interested in investing is essential to go into investment management. But so many of the skills are transferable, that intellectual curiosity, the ability to research something, to express it and summarize a conclusion concisely and to convince your colleagues. All of those things are skills that are essential in investment management, but you'll also find them in other pockets, and certainly in STEM, and in, you know, medical or a PhD background would be very, very essential skills there, I'm sure. Mona, maybe can I bring you into with another question that we've received online, which is someone who's asked, I struggle to find people in my personal networks who can encourage me to find sources of education to bridge the gap to go into investment management from university. And is there anything that you can recommend that students do to augment their university education to get them into or get them more information about investment management?
Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I would say is I want to echo the other panelists' thoughts that the internet is your best friend. LinkedIn is there for you, and it doesn't matter if your personal network isn't very helpful. I really think that's okay. That's what LinkedIn is there for, and don't be scared to message whoever you want to on there. If they ignore you, they ignore you. It's fine. You didn't know them anyway. And so do that. Go on YouTube and go on the websites of many asset managers, because they will be uploading quarterly commentaries for many of their strategies. There'll be such a wealth of information on there. You could pass 6-7 hours a day just reading on there. And what I personally would do, I was thinking about what I would do if I was sat in your shoes yesterday, and I would be consuming all this information from the internet, but then I would probably choose a couple of sectors that I was really interested in, maybe luxury goods, maybe airlines, I don't know, whatever it was. And I would try to write a few pages of my thoughts on those sectors. You know, is the sector growing or shrinking? Even if it's shrinking, are there still investment opportunities in my view? Or maybe actually I think that sector is dead in the water and maybe I might explore shorting. And once I'd written something, even if I didn't think it was very good, I would probably be saying to whoever it was on LinkedIn, oh, I'm exploring my ideas in the investment world. I'm just beginning. I thought I would start with a couple of sectors. Maybe you might have a look at my work, or maybe we can just get on a Zoom call for 10 minutes and talk about whether you disagree with my views. I just think it's somewhere to start a conversation, because sometimes my difficulty when people want to start a conversation with me and they're more junior in their career is I might feel like I'm always having the same conversation, and I might not be able to really ascertain just how keen that person is. But if they give me a tool to help me understand how keen they are, and I'll definitely be interested to read their work, it's a really great starting point.
That's brilliant. That's super. I know we're going to lose Anna in about two minutes. So maybe before you go, I can just draw you in for one last quick question, Anna, and just ask you if there's any resources that you rely on and that you can also recommend to students to just augment their knowledge of investment management?
Yes, I mean, I guess there's a huge number of books that have been written on the subject. And in fact, I was wondering today whether or not on the GAIN website, there's a list of kind of resources that you could use, but maybe that's something we can follow up on later. But
there is. So.
Oh, okay. Then I would definitely encourage you to go to the GAIN website, and there should be a list of resources there that you can take a look at. That would definitely be a starting point. I mean, rather than just sort of expand as well on resources, just maybe sort of following up on Mona's point, which I thought was excellent. Another thing you could possibly try is sort of almost just from, reading kind of financial press. So whether or not it's the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, FT, The Economist, start to try and find a few companies that somehow make you feel excited when you read about them, and maybe make a list of 5. And then start following them, and actually maybe even have a spreadsheet where you note down, okay, well, I made my list, I finalized my list of what I think is really interesting today, and this is the share price. And you can probably just look up that share price on Google. And over the next year, track how your little list does. And then maybe it doesn't really matter whether or not your list does well or badly. Actually understanding the factors for what kind of made one do well or one do badly can be just as interesting. So, I really think there's a very wide range of possible resources you could use to kind of broaden your imagination or your understanding. But I really think that sort of, as Mona suggested, doing something and actually engaging in almost an investment process is just as valuable.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. And Annabel, I know we're going to lose you, Anna, so we'll wave, or I think we're...
Yeah, like, it's okay. I can stay on till 1 minute too.
Okay, great. Super. So Annabel, really quickly in the last maybe 2 minutes, if I can ask you the same question of just, any resources you would point students to, and then I will go to a wrap up.
Yeah, no, I think the other 2 panelists have done a good job in answering that. I would just add, there are quite often investor societies as well. So, I would look for something like that where you could get together, because I think part of it is also that discussion piece. So, if you can find a couple of other people who might be interested to discuss with you and hear, why did they pick this stock and you chose that stock? That might be a good way to try to reach out to other people who've got similar interests to you. And I think, certainly reading, if you're going to go for interviews in this world, they will have expected you to, be up to speed on what's going on in markets and the financial press. And then I would just say, do your homework. So specific companies also have reading lists on their website. So I know, for example, Sapiens is a book that Facebook says you have to read. So I think if you are going to target specific companies, also just be smart about it and say, right, if I want to go, work at this company, maybe I should read about their history. And I think that's where, you can really impress people in interviews, when you just come in more prepared, basically.
No, I think that's great. Now, if I can summarize kind of what the panel said on this point, LinkedIn is a great tool, and I completely agree with what Mona and Anna have said about just using it as a tool to find out as much as possible about investment careers, and don't be afraid to ask questions and find out what is the sell side, what is the buy side, what is credit, what is equities. Learn as much as you can, because it can help you target your skills and where you find your natural fit. So I wish we had more time, but unfortunately I need to wrap up. I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists who shared their great insights, and not just on how they're weathering this current environment, but also how people can potentially become an investment manager. So thank you all so much. I hope that the audience has found it as interesting and as insightful as I did. And we do, I appreciate the plug, Anna, very much. I would point everyone to the GAIN website, which is gainuk.org. And I would also encourage you to follow us on Instagram and on LinkedIn, our social media channels, and especially Instagram, which is Girls Are Investors. and we share updates and inspiration and work resources. And our website has a whole page dedicated to resources that might be of interest to you. And you can sign up for our mailing list if you want to stay informed. If you'd like to do that, you can reach out to our fantastic administrator, Sophie, who's been organizing this call. And her email address is Sophie, SOPHIE, @gainuk.org. So thank you all again for joining us. I really appreciate the time, and it's lovely meeting and speaking with you all, and I hope to see you again very soon. Thanks.